Hi, good morning, and I'm Raiman, and you're watching ASEAN Kita, a show where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities that lies within the region. As the ASEAN Summit takes place in Kuala Lumpur, this isn't just another round of talks. It's Malaysia's turn to lead the region, and expectations are high. From navigating US-China rivalry to dealing with the South China Sea and Myanmar to shaping ASEAN's digital and green future, this chairmanship matters. To break it all down, we're joined by Collins Chong Yew Keat, Foreign Affairs and Security Analyst from Universiti Malaya. Collins, thank you for joining us. Let's start with something basic for our viewers. For someone at home who's never read an ASEAN communique, how would you explain what the KL Declaration is really about? And at its core, what issue is it trying to address?
Yes, thank you, Admiral. Good morning. We have seen how, ASEAN has evolved fundamentally since, the formation during the height of the Cold War. And as we can see by now, different challenges. We have, during the post-Cold War period, initially we have this initial focus on the non-traditional threat settings. And now we have seen the return of traditional threats, led by high-intensity conflicts, and also the threats of, flashpoints in South China Sea, and also different flashpoints throughout the world, and the impact on ASEAN unity, on ASEAN resilience responses. And of course, we have also seen how the need to evolve into a future-driven, forward-looking ASEAN that can withstand and that can lead regional and global challenges, and also collectively as a unit, how we can manage these internal divisions, internal wariness, internal weaknesses and loopholes. So basically, these are all the fundamental core facets of how ASEAN should evolve. And I think this is all being, included in the collective focus on the Kuala Lumpur Declaration moving forward in the next 20 years by 2045, looking ahead and looking into the future risk settings in terms of, threats facing this region. So basically in all areas of, areas of low politics to areas of high politics, including security, defense, and also, of course, digital economy, the economic transition capacity, energy transition, supply chain resilience, digital transformation. So all these things are being, the one of the core focus areas that we in Malaysia, as the chair for this year, are trying to, have this consolidated and synergized approach with regards to this ASEAN collective responses to this evolving and ever-shifting global geopolitical dynamics, and also the uncertainties ahead for the next 2 decades in terms of economic settings and all that. So this KL Declaration is basically trying to capture a new sense of ASEAN renewal and to prevent this, to prevent ASEAN from falling deeper into this whole new realm of irrelevance and, stagnation. So I think this is the whole dream of Malaysia trying to assert its, its role as, the regional leader in this aspect.
So may I ask that, do you expect any ASEAN members to push back on the KL Declaration? If so, which ASEAN members is likely to push back hardest on the final wording, and why, perhaps?
We have been very careful in terms of our wordings and statements. We have been trying to project this Malaysian centrality and unique position of, strategic hedging and balancing against different, rivals, and of course, this whole evolving dynamic of power rivalries in the region. And this is being translated into the, greater regional level of maintaining ASEAN, unique model and mantra of neutrality, non-aligned capacity. And the KL Declaration is basically a very, safe haven. It's a safe bet by Malaysia to focus more on areas of global politics, on ensuring internal, unity, addressing internal gaps in terms of intra-trade capacity, in terms of, an inclusive ASEAN in line with the theme for this year. Also to ensure that, there's this future-driven, forward-looking economic progress and joint capacity in all these different areas, including science and technology, and of course also in terms of digital transformation. So all these are being, seen as, areas of global politics that can have greater, leverage on all this, on the collective concerns and the collective needs of all ASEAN members. So I don't foresee any, kind of resistance in that aspect, except for areas of high politics, which we have been trying not to focus that much on, because of the need to get the buy-in from different ASEAN members. So in terms of the confrontation on South China Sea, and the urgency to in ensuring that COC is being initiated and being collectively agreed upon. So a lot of these concerns of the future are being addressed in KL Declaration, and I don't foresee any kind of strong resistance from ASEAN members, except for issues regarding Myanmar, for example, which has been like standing out as a sore thumb in terms of this perception of ASEAN being a weak entity with no credible enforcing power, and also addressing its own internal issues. So of course, also in standing up against the actions by China, for example, in South China Sea, and also the different concerns, different responses by ASEAN members with regards to these actions by China, and also the new power presence from external capacity in terms of the new power rivalry in the region. So all in all, KL Declaration, I would argue, is a very safe bet. Nothing substantial on how ASEAN can move forward in terms of increasing its own deterrence capacity against major powers, but focusing more on things that are of great concerns to all ASEAN members, on economy, on investments, on trade, on inclusive development, in addressing transboundary crimes, in addressing development gaps. So these are the things on giving more education capacities and all that. So these are the things that I think will be of great will be of main areas of interest for the KL Declaration, Amirul.
All right, Collins, Malaysia came into this chairmanship with clear priorities like digital cooperation, food security and green finance. Since January, which of these areas have we actually seen real movement or results on?
We have seen quite a very general positive, robust response from Malaysia, as we know that we have been moving very strongly in terms of our own energy transition, our economic transition based on digital transformation, green energy, of course also on green economy, on blue economy now as a maritime trading nation. So these are all being translated into how we also want the same momentum to be seen at the ASEAN level, the wider ASEAN level, of how we would like to move ASEAN forward in terms of, like, of course, food security, maintaining a very robust and resilient supply chain system, and to ensure that we increase our intra-ASEAN trade, and of course to focus more on ASEAN as a collective economic entity as a result of the tariff war and all that. So, and of course, with all these talks about the capacity of ASEAN collectively as a unit in terms of demographic potential, increasing younger population that will inject new dynamism into the workforce. Of course, also in areas of digital setting, increasing cyber awareness, cyber security threats and all that, and on the aspects of non-traditional threat setting. So I would say that all in all, in all these aspects, we have been at the forefront in leading ASEAN momentum, ASEAN intent, but not so at the level of which will be of great concerns to all ASEAN members, and of course also to individual ASEAN members with regards to defending the rules-based order, defending the sanctity of the international and maritime law, also standing up very strongly against aggressions or actions by external powers in disrupting or in disregarding the international law. That will of course have a profound impact on the sanctity of sovereignty and territorial integrity of ASEAN as a whole, and also of course on ASEAN individual member states. We have been refraining from at a very high level, at least publicly, to push very deeply on all these matters, which is why ASEAN is now being seen by Washington and the West as a lost cause in standing up for this rules-based order and the international norms, and to push back against against aggressions or bellicosity in flashpoints such as South China Sea, and also potential flashpoints that might impact us, the potential Taiwan fallout, also the increasing Chinese presence in Indian Ocean or the Pacific Island states, which are not being addressed deeply or collectively at the ASEAN level. I mean.
And Collins, we have also seen strong engagement from Washington, both Washington and Beijing at this summit. One pushing for a special meeting, and the other is strengthening its economic links with the region. In your view, how well is Malaysia as a chair maintain genuine neutrality amid all of these geopolitics struggle within the region, Collins?
Yeah, we have been relying on this decades-old mantra of strategic, hedging, balancing, trying to play as the, neutral, role in all this, evolving power rivalry. And we hope that ASEAN can maintain the same stance, and of course also not to be aligned to any particular power. And of course, this has opened up even greater risk for the region. I would argue that, this decades-old mantra of neutrality and strategic, hedging, has not worked out well for ASEAN, because we have seen even greater incursions, we have seen even greater power penetration in the region. And with all these mechanisms that we have in place, we have the TSA, Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, we have the Southeast Asian nuclear weapon free zone, we have the old concept of ZOPFAN, and of course also, non-interference concept and all that. So all this have failed to deter, even greater power presence here. We have increased Chinese power projections. We have also seen, as a result of this increased Chinese power projection and the eventual wariness and fears of ASEAN member states as a result of this action, have also invited greater counter responses, counter forces by the West, which are needed by ASEAN. But we can't admit that publicly for the fear of upsetting the apple cart. But in hindsight, behind the scenes, we actually welcome greater power presence in terms of having this greater deterrent effects and raising the cost for the foreign powers to increase its bellicose actions here. So all this have not turned out well for ASEAN. We have seen how deeply divided ASEAN is in terms of responding to this power presence by external forces. And we have Manila now having its own responses to this issue in South China Sea. We have a very divided ASEAN in terms of how best to ensure ASEAN's safety and security, and knowing that collectively we don't stand a chance in terms of having this combined deterrent capacity, and we still are very much reliant on the Western power, especially Washington, in backing us, supporting us militarily and in all aspects of power, including of course on economic terms, in terms of getting the technologies and being reliant on US markets and all that. So in our quest, in ASEAN's quest to get the best of both worlds, we have been relying on Beijing for most of our economic and technological support. But at the same time, we are very much heavily reliant on Washington in terms of getting us the security backing. So we can't do this model forever, because getting the best out of both worlds without offering credible returns to both powers. So we only signal the irrelevance of this mantra of ASEAN neutrality. So for as long as we are reliant on external powers for all these support systems, we are very much in our own self-imposed trap of this model that has, I would argue, failed to bring ASEAN forward as compared to what EU has done with a very different contextual historical pretext as compared to ASEAN.
Well, we're just getting started on today's episode, but we'll take a quick break. Still ahead, can ASEAN stay neutral in an increasingly polarized world, and how should Malaysia lead through the region's toughest challenges? We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back after this.
Perusahaan kecil dan sederhana, impian besar. Jiwa SME Astro AWANI kembali menjelajah Malaysia. Dari Ipoh ke Kota Kinabalu, dari Melaka ke Lembah Kelang. Sesi pitching, pameran produk dan dialog bersama pemimpin industri serantau. Dapatkan inspirasi, ilmu dan peluang untuk kembangkan perniagaan anda, semuanya di bawah satu bumbung. Kerana inilah medan impak sebenar. Jiwa SME menjana impak, inovasi digital.
Satu semangat, satu perjuangan. Maruah negara menjadi taruhan. Pertembungan dua benua. Malaysia menentang Cape Verde secara langsung di Astro Arena Bola dan Astro Go.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back to ASEAN Kita, and I'm still joined by Collins Chong as we continue looking at Malaysia's leadership at the ASEAN Summit and what it means for the region's future amid global uncertainty. Collins, looking ahead, US-China rivalry doesn't seem to be cooling anytime soon. If this continues, where do you honestly see ASEAN's role 5 years from now? Will we be a broker or a buffer, or perhaps just a bystander?
We have been trying to serve, the best interests of both sides, and by, trying to mediate and trying not to be sucked into this increasing security dilemma, arms races, power rivalries, but to no avail. I would argue that we have a failed approach for the past 5 to 6 decades. We tried that approach during the Cold War, and now it's a totally different setting. We have seen how, despite all the mechanisms that we have in place to prevent war, to prevent deterioration in terms of tensions and conflicts, we have failed to do that. And of course, also we have also failed to address individual concerns by ASEAN member states, with different agenda, with different responses, with different affiliations, and also, of course, also internal wariness with one another. So all these mechanisms, unlike what the EU has done, EU is born out of basically, the aftermath of the world wars, and of course, insecurity, the concerns of another world war, looms large at their, in terms of their initial calculations, and that's why they have this institutional backing. They have governance oversight, and they have this very strong defensive alliance, security alliance, to ensure that their main concerns are addressed. But unlike us, we don't have that in place. And of course, we have very distinct, very different responses, grouses, concerns, and those are not being addressed by ASEAN as a whole. And dependence and alliance and affiliations with external powers are seen as giving more returns to address these concerns by individual ASEAN member states as compared to what ASEAN can offer to them. Knowing that ASEAN as a unit collectively, does not have this military or power capacity to defend ASEAN against these external, projections of power and aggressions. And all of us are cognizant that we are still very much reliant on the West, or even on other powers, including Russia, as a welcome, maybe third power force in the region. So to have this strong deterrence impact on these actions by China, for example. So as long as this exists, and also looking into the overall dynamic power play between Beijing and Washington, I would argue that Beijing is now peaking in terms of power, and as compared to traditional norms that US is in decline and all that. We can see that by almost all power indicators, Washington will still retain its, of course, military hard power dominance. Also in terms of economic, might, in terms of its favorable demographic potential in the future, as compared to China with its aging population. China will get old faster than when they get rich. So in terms of also how the internal systemic economic decline, and for this notion of ASEAN being heavily reliant on Chinese economic settings, from RCEP to BRI to investments and all that, this a big China with the start of its own decline will also spell major changes in terms of this whole economic ecosystem of being too reliant on China as the economic backing. And at the same time, we can see that in the next decade, this the risk of conflicts over Taiwan and the fallout from the Taiwan conflict, or also maybe in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Island states, are profound on ASEAN as a whole. But we are yet to have this kind of shield, this kind of credible deterrent capacity. And moving forward in the next 4 to 5 years, even before 2045, in all of the hype to have this KL declaration by 2045, we don't have a credible ASEAN defensive mechanism. And by then, if we still to continue with this approach of getting the best out of both worlds, in the end we will be trapped, and the vulnerabilities are too high for ASEAN as a whole. Not getting the support needed from Washington, because in Trump's eyes, ASEAN collectively, we have, in terms of average per capita income, we are just 5,000 to 6,000 on average at the ASEAN level, which is not being seen as favorable by Washington because of this low buying power, low demand, and still being trapped as a middle income entity. And of course, as a middle power, we don't have yet the sufficient leverage and influence on global affairs as much as we want to. So with this declining, returns to Washington, especially under Trump administration, they will not be willing to increase its power presence here, and we'll be losing in terms of getting the needed defense support from the US, while at the same time in our quest to expand our economic friendshoring efforts with GCC, with Global South, And with China, they are also declining in terms of their economic powers, despite all the hypes. And in the end, we will be trapped. And this is the thing that, of course, also during the presidential transition later on after Trump 2.0, this will be the period where we think will be which I will argue that will be of great concern, because by then greater uncertainties abound, where Beijing might flex its muscle more, and in terms of preventing this American dominance in the next decade. So all these are being taken into account, and I would say that if we don't change now, if ASEAN doesn't have the audacity to escape from this trap of neutrality and centrality, we will be at the losing end for ASEAN as a whole, in security terms, Amirul.
And when we talk about ASEAN's issues, there are quite a number of them, and the South China Sea remains a flashpoint, and accidents are always just one miscalculation away. What practical steps do you think can ASEAN take this year to manage that risk more effectively?
We have been trying to manage those risks more effectively, as you have stated just now, for years now. We have the DOC, and now we are trying to hasten the completion of the COC. But I will argue, even if the COC is agreed upon and it's in place, there's no guarantee that it won't be, being disregarded, as much as how Beijing can disregard the decisions by the court in 2016. Those are the international law, and those are the maritime laws. They are in place to safeguard the norms and all that. But if those can be being disregarded, and what more if COC is in place? So to me, all the while ASEAN and Malaysia have been too much reliant on diplomacy and dialogue as the first line of defense, which is of course the norms. But we don't have a credible second backing of a very robust, credible, future-driven and long-term support system for ASEAN as a whole in terms of hard power and defense support externally. So for as much as we were to be reliant on this aspect, if that fails, then we are sitting ducks against these future threats. Or this new future warfare of drone capacity. We don't have sufficient, anti-missile system, air defense system for ASEAN as a whole, in defending this new generation missile, system and air power. So all this make ASEAN even more vulnerable in all these aspects. And for South China Sea, we have seen how we have failed to deter or to send a strong message out of this, fear and retaliation from Beijing in terms of the economic grip and economic tool. And for as long as we are trapped in this mantra, we won't get the best of the deterrent support from Washington, knowing that we have been failing to stand up strongly against these violations of the international law and maritime rules, and for what reasons that they will have to increase their support if we are not even taking the charge here in terms of bolstering our own defense capacity, especially under Trump administration. So, and of course, in regards to the tariff war, we have been trying to get this solidified response to go against the tariffs and to stand up very strongly. This will even create more pretext for the Trump administration to detach itself more from this region, which will leave us even more vulnerable. So I think it's a very foolish and unwise move for ASEAN as a whole to affiliate more with this China-led anti-tariff approach. Australia has refrained from joining that, and we should not join a bandwagon of standing up very strongly against the tariff, because we are still very much reliant on the American market being the biggest economy, being the largest economy on earth, and of course in terms of the overall need for defense support and also technological investments. So these are things I think that ASEAN will need to have a very hard practical look into all this, and it needs to be honest with all the current loopholes and gaps, and how we move forward will depend on how Malaysia as a chair for this year can initiate all these changes moving forward.
Collins, I want to bring this conversation to Myanmar. Myanmar remains one of the thorniest challenges on the table, and the 5-point consensus clearly isn't working. Do you think Malaysia should now lead the bloc in pushing for tougher action, or is it time to throw out the old playbook and try something new altogether?
Of course, I've been arguing that the 5PC, the 5-point consensus, has been obsolete. We have been harping on that for years now to no avail. For the past 3 to 4 years, ASEAN has clearly failed to bring any practical solutions to Myanmar because of the fact that each has its own agenda. We are still ignorant of the grouses or concerns of Thailand. We have sidelined Thailand in that aspect previously. So I think I laud the efforts by our current Prime Minister to have a bold new approach to the whole Myanmar crisis, and of course not being confined to past barriers and traps. And it is time to focus on both sides, because for the past 3 to 4 years, ASEAN has not been wanting to give any form of legitimacy to the junta. Of course, also not granting NUG the official legitimate recognition. So it's like we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. So this is a time where Trump's approach of common sense policy, for example, in Ukraine, having this notion to meet, to have contact with Putin, and of course, during the first term, to meet also with Kim Jong-un. So in any form of conflicts, you need to engage with both sides. And it will be futile for you to only, focus on the traditional aspects of conflict management. Though if Biden were to continue his presidency, we can see that, he will continue his old approach of only injecting, capital and, military infrastructure to Ukraine, and this will prolong the conflict. When Trump comes into the picture, he foresees the common sense approach needed, and ASEAN should do the same, not being confined to this traditional approach of only, having this one approach to solve the conflicts, and this whole notion of perception of ASEAN being weak, being confined, being limited by its, non-interference agenda and all that, will only increase because of this, the stagnant, options that we have now. So it is of great importance and it is of great urgency for Malaysia now to be able to have the audacity to create a new bold approach, not being confined to the 5-point consensus, and to understand the main core concerns and fears and threats being faced by both sides, both the junta and also the NUG. And of course, the 5-point consensus should not be the sole, factor that will still stand in the way of, Myanmar moving forward. And, Myanmar, and also the need to have this external power forces, external power influence to assert the right carrot and stick approach on Myanmar, on the junta, and also on NUG, because we have been so complacent. We have been trying to say that this is our problem, and the Americans or the Chinese or the Indians should not play a part in this. This is a wrong approach, because for Myanmar, ASEAN might not be that important to Myanmar's, or the junta's, immediate future, and we will need the influence, the pressure that we don't have, ASEAN collectively, but which Washington has, and Beijing has, or New Delhi has, or even Moscow has, to also play their parts and to equate this to also with the peace process in Ukraine now, and how Myanmar can also complement the peace efforts in Ukraine with regards to what Beijing and Moscow and Washington have been doing for the past few weeks. So we have to break out of our old trap and mantra of ASEAN unique approach, and to let go and to finally get the strategic engagement from external powers, which have direct, influence and also power on both the junta and NUG, and to rope in the role of Washington, Beijing, and of course also New Delhi as the main power brokers for the Myanmar issue. Amirul.
Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Collins Chong Yew Keat for the deep dive into ASEAN's big picture challenges, from security to strategy to leadership, and where Malaysia stands in the middle of it all. As the summit continues, we'll be watching closely to see if ASEAN can turn unity into action. Well, I guess that's all the time for today's episode of ASEAN Kita. I'm Rahman. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on ASEAN Kita.